Security VIP is the official podcast of the security industry, from manufacturers to end users and everything in between. Security VIP is your home for nothing but the truth.
You think you know me?
On this day, I see clear. You're listening to the Security VIP podcast, hosted by Taylor May, the official podcast of the security industry and home of nothing but the truth. Coming to you live at ISC West. Today on Security VIP, we host a panel discussion on preparing for the unknown and active assailants. Sponsored by VLSC, Acre, and M6 Global. Panelists include former Navy SEAL and current co-founder, COO of ZeroEyes, Rob Huberty. Former United States Secret Service agent and current owner, CEO of M6 Global, Mike Matranga. And Homeland Security Director of Texas City, Texas, Tom Munoz. Get ready for nothing but the truth.
Security VIP Nation, what is going on? Welcome back to another episode of the Security VIP podcast, the official podcast of the security industry, and your home for nothing but the truth. As always, I'm your host, Taylor May, and on today's episode, we're coming to you live from the ISC West Conference in beautiful Las Vegas, sponsored by the teams at VLSC, Acre, and M6 Global. Today, we will speak about a topic that has unfortunately made national headlines too many times here in the U.S. Active shooter scenarios and mass shootings are events no one should have to experience, and yet we see these events continue to happen in schools, big box retail locations, distribution facilities, shopping malls, and many other places. So, how do we prepare for it? How do we prevent it? What technologies are available? How much does it cost? Today, I'm welcomed by three industry professionals who speak nothing but the truth when it comes to combating the active shooter challenge in America head on. With that being said, it is my pleasure to welcome Rob Huberty of ZeroEyes, Mike Matranga of M6 Global, and Tom Munoz of Texas City, Texas, to the Security VIP podcast today. Gentlemen, welcome to ISC. How are we doing today?
I'm having an amazing time.
I know you are. It's a little offsetting here because, normally my podcast is recorded. It's over Zoom. And I do these virtually, sometimes in person. But Mike Matranga has been on my podcast multiple times. I've had ZeroEyes on my podcast multiple times. So it's a pleasure to have all three of you here today. And I want to get this kicked off right off the bat. And Rob, I want to start with you. You're a former Navy SEAL. You're a co-founder of ZeroEyes. So you've obviously had to experience these active shooter threats head on. And my question to you is, from your perspective, what are the current security challenges you see when it comes to active assailants? And with your experience being a Navy SEAL, what were some procedures or call to action plans you put in place when dealing with these scenarios?
Right, so I carried a gun for a good portion of my life, for about 10 years, and the interesting thing is I don't know how much of that necessarily translates, because we were expecting to get into a gunfight, and we trained for years and years and years to do that. And for the duration of your deployment, when you went out at night, you kind of had that as in the back of your mind that something could happen. So you were completely locked on, completely prepared. You had rules of engagement in your favor. You had better weapons, ideally. You were going to set up the best scenario that you could possibly have in the whole world for success. And that's a very different scenario than what happens in the United States, where it's not supposed to happen. So during our training trips, we would go to a place, get ready. We would, go do our training for the day, work really hard, and then go out. If we were to get into a gunfight on the way to practicing for gunfights, we wouldn't have looked that good. And we're like, the best in the world. If you got, SEAL Team 6 in their rental cars away to a trip, they wouldn't know what was going on. Right. They'd be like, oh wait, I don't have loaded guns. I'm not really ready for this. And the same thing could be said when you're on a deployment. When you're in the helicopter on your way out there, yeah, you're locked on. But if somebody were to attack you in the middle of the night on your base and outrun your base, you'd be in a better mindset to be able to do something, but it's something that switches, right? Now you take that into police, which have a much harder job, where there's cell phones in their face and they're doing all these things, and they do a traffic stop. You're at a baseball game and something unexpected happens. What do? And there's no amount of training that you really can do to be prepared for something that is wildly outside of your norms.
Right.
So the only thing that you can do is that when you're doing your job and you're setting up an event, you need to cover all of your bases. You basically need to have that same idea of anything could happen there. It just got dark in here.
You have sleep in back
right? Motion
set the
sensors.
mood
It doesn't see, now there we go. So to prep yourself in scenarios, for a big event like this, there's security, there's staff, you need to do this, and it would still be incredibly shocking, but they're prepped. But when you're on your way to get, gas at the gas station, that's when that shock happens and no one's ready for it. And I don't know what amount of training that you can do to prep you. First responders obviously are the ones who are going to be best at that. And anybody else, like if you're somebody who's a concealed carry person, like are you really going to be enact that? It's going to take incredible training to change that mindset. And so in certain environments, I think what I learned in the military is that basically cheat to win. Whatever it is that you possibly can do, every advantage that you can take, you need to. And whether that's a mindset, whether that's the right equipment, whether that's setting up security checkpoints in the way that it is, I think that you're kind of obligated to do that. And the environment that we're in is a little bit different now with the frequency of that. That's going to get real annoying. The lights keep turning off. But the ability to do that and to give the best case scenario and to kind of be ready and to go through drills is going to be your best bet. Because the complacency that you can do if you're a police officer and you're pulling over somebody and like, I'm tired, it's late at night. The one that you're not expecting is the one that's going to be bad. And unfortunately, these events are the kinds of things that are the most difficult to solve, the most difficult to see coming because you don't see them coming. And it's hard to maintain this unbelievably high posture without either training or the right equipment. So in the environment that I'm most used to, which is very difficult and in some ways less challenging in the military, like I know that I need to be ready for this. I get to walk around in body armor and camouflage with guns and have airplanes over me. Like you can't do that when you're at a baseball game. Like that's just not realistic. But because it's an event, what could they do to better prep for it? And I think that, certainly with ZeroEyes, what we're trying to do is to give those people less shock, less surprise, less, oh my God, what do I do? And if you use those first responders, the people who train for this all the time, and you give them better information, you should be able to kind of cheat to make everybody a little bit safer. And that's all that we can do because it's so profound how hard it is when in these scenarios. When you talk about, you go to the grocery store and then something terrible, like nobody is ready for that.
Yeah, Boulder, Colorado, right? A couple months ago, they had to go through an active shooting, and that's just a scenario that's that black swan event that we keep talking about. And how are you prepared in a scenario like that? What are those checklist items, though?
So I think if you're, the access control in a lot of environments is really important, right? But what about a grocery store where you don't want access control?
Right.
Our company, the idea is we're going to use your cameras that you already have anyway as a preventative measure, right? And so the whole idea of our product is one where you use the video cameras that you have, and it's just detecting guns. And that's, it's a narrow use case, but it's something that can provide that information before a shot is fired. And that is our whole use case. But I think overall, people who are in law enforcement and do these things and are trying to protect people, they need every one of those tools in their tool belt that they possibly can have. And it's better to be prepared and not need it than it is to need it and not have it. And so that's kind of, I think you need the training, you need to be able to use the tools that you have in the best scenario possible to kind of cheat to win. And that's kind of, I think the methodology that I like to do and what I think that we as a company are trying to do, and anybody who's in the security space, they need to do that. They need to go through the procedures, actually practice it, because if you don't practice something, it's not going to work when you need it.
Yeah, 100%. I think the whole mindset there, Mike and Tom, what Rob just said, is there's no one single solution that's going to solve this problem, right? I think we need to view this from a holistic lens, but a proactive lens at that. So it's going to take training, it's going to take response time, or technologies and AI technology, or a lockdown procedure. These certain kind of trainings have to be put in place to hopefully mitigate this problem, and hopefully end the active shooter challenge right now we see here in the U.S. So, Mike, I want to start with you next. Former safety director, executive director of Texas City ISD, you made national headlines as one of the safest school districts in Texas. as well as the U.S. So huge credentials. You're also a former a former U.S. Secret Service agent. Let's talk about K-12 and higher ed. School shootings, they are still happening. And what is from your experience, what is phase one towards solving these shootings?
Well, I'm going to get to that response here in just a second, but I do want to piggyback off of what Rob stated. And just like with him in the Secret Service, thank you. I'm a former United States Secret Service counter assault team operator, and one of the things that we realized about midway through my time on the counter assault team is that, obviously the Secret Service, I believe, does planning and mitigation better than pretty much anybody. And I'm a little bit biased, and so I don't mean to sound cocky, but we think about the things that other people do not think about. For example, one of the things that I recognized just walking around up on the exhibit floor today was that there seems to be zero medical companies here, right? That is a very crucial part of an active shooter, unknown assailant, emergency operations plan. And so we have, and I'd like to introduce Abraham Medina. He's a physician's assistant and former White House Medical Unit Tactical Medical Officer, 22-year Army combat veteran, and works for the DOD now, and he's part of our team. That's one of the things that we recognize walking the floor is, we talk about security products, we talk about security solutions, but we don't talk about that holistic approach. And so, even with what Rob said, to piggyback off of him is, you can plan for an event, right? But it's the unknown event that you don't see coming that ends up causing the most damage, right? And so, from my perspective, everything you do in life, whether it be whether it be going to the grocery store or going to your kid's soccer game, going to a mass gathering event, sporting events, soccer, whatever, you need to have a certain level of situational awareness. And some people will argue that, hey, you're creating an atmosphere of chaos. I disagree with that. I'm creating an atmosphere of awareness of my surroundings because we live in a society that has evolved and has changed to a point where we must start planning that way, even in our day-to-day lives, not just with your company, not with your I almost said constituents because I'm an elected official, school board member, but with your customers. Is every aspect needs to be thought out. Medical, emergency, crisis communications, triage areas, and it starts with planning. And so with the Secret Service, one of the things we realize is, yes, we're planning for this mission. We've been briefed on this mission. We know who our adversaries are. And it dawned on us about 2 years after I was on the team that, we're most vulnerable when we're doing administrative movements. When we land in a foreign country that's hostile and we're just making administrative movements from the airport to the hotel, we're still targets. So why are we not preparing the same way? The adversary is still the same. So we started then working those administrative movements as if the protectee or the president was with us. So to get to your question, I apologize. I just wanted to piggyback.
This is why we have Mike on the podcast, because he loves to speak the truth.
In the K-12 market, and I like to engage with the audience. Who all here so I show of hands, is a security professional that works for a security company? Please show your hands. Okay. Anybody in education here? Okay. What's your job, sir?
Physical security coordinator.
Physical security coordinator.
Building security operations.
Okay. And what states?
Texas.
Oh,
Katy.
perfect. Where?
Katy.
Katy. Okay.
University of Iowa.
Okay, gotcha. All right. Anybody else in any other industries here?
Healthcare.
Was healthcare?
Hospital.
Okay.
Finance.
Okay, great. So, what we want to talk about in K-12, and we'll get to the other markets here in just a second, but what we want to talk about in K-12 is it's a very complex market, whether it be higher education, whether it be K-12. And I'm going to say this because Taylor always wants me to tell the truth, and I've said it before, and I'm not an employee of a school district anymore. I'm now a school board member. Is I believe, and this is, some of you may have your feelings hurt, but I believe that one of the largest threats to our students and our staff is uninformed and unexperienced superintendents that are making decisions for the safety and security of our staff. And when I say that, people get hurt when I talk about that. But here's the deal. At the end of the day, my job is to make sure that people are safe, whether it be our staff, our students, and our community. And we're going to do everything that we can from a proactive nature to make sure that that happens. Well, what does that look like? It starts with a survey, right? And we talk about, even the title of this presentation is the Preparing for the Active Assailant or Unknown Assailant. I like to say there is no unknown assailants. How many times have you watched after an active shooting where you go, or the news media goes and interviews someone, maybe a coworker, let's say workplace violence, because there seems to be an uptick in that here. And somebody always says, yeah, John he was just weird. The last couple months he's kind of had, he's gone through a divorce, his behavior's been erratic, he's had a financial hardship, whatever, right? He lost his kids or her kids. And I can't say that I'm surprised I didn't see this coming. The signs and symptoms are always there. The National Threat Assessment Center at the United States Secret Service has been doing this since 1999. Tom and I testified 5 times on Senate Bill 11, which is now the state security mandate for K-12. First question that I was asked by our senators is, what seems to be the problem? What are the solutions? How do we identify these people? The problem is that the identifiers have been there since 1999 after Columbine. We're just not paying attention. Or we have, in the K-12 and higher education fields, we have superintendents or deans that believe that their PhD qualifies them to keep people safe. And sometimes we must talk as adults and be very direct in our speak and not worry about people's feelings. So,
well, let's go off that though, because this brings up a good point and one of my questions. There was a school district in Virginia for SROs. They wanted to remove their firearm from SROs and then not call them school resource officers, but call them safety coaches. What good does that give a school district when it comes to an active shooter scenario if you replace an SRO with a safety coach or safety director?
They better know some good kung fu.
But this is the point Mike's talking about.
Light. It's this whole ideology that we're going to disarm or defund police and think that we're going to just talk people out of this is a very dangerous thing that we're doing. And it's going to take individuals like us to speak up and speak out to change that dynamic and that rhetoric, because we all know that people don't just wake up one day and decide that they're going to kill people or kill kids in a school. That is planned. It is, the signs and symptoms are always there, and we need to do better at identifying them. And so you talk about what's the first step. The first step is identification. It's properly trained staff, it's properly trained and informed community of what are the signs and symptoms, and then us having resources for those individuals. Now, I'm a big fan of mental health, and mental health is sometimes there's a stigma associated with the term mental health. So we have kind of renamed or relabeled or rebranded mental health as emotional intelligence. And, basically that's, teaching someone the triggers of their own triggers, what triggers themselves, right? And how to deal with their stress. And so, one of the things that we talk about in the K-12 market when I was at Texas City ISD is, I believe that everything should start with a plan. We work off of this 75-25% ratio, 75% proactive, and that is all encompassing with planning and emotional support, mental health, and then having the solutions. And if you do a good job of planning, the 25% is simply reactive, right? And so it's being proactive, getting out, identifying the problems through human behavior. We don't talk about behaviors. I tell people all the time that people will lie to you, behaviors do not. And if you look at a pattern of behavior, you can tell if someone is at a greater risk of harming someone or themselves. Sorry. Tom. I just felt like I was talking too much. I want to talk to Tom.
Tom, we're not going to leave you out, man.
No, I want Tom to jump in on this crisis communication
Yeah.
piece, and you talk about the plan. There's a key component of that, right?
So Tom, tell us about that, because your background at Texas City, Homeland Security Director, you manage these large events, emergency management, public safety events. From your perspective, what does it mean to protect the citizens of Texas City, Texas, when it comes to an active assailant event?
That's a great question. So my background does include, working for the city of Houston, and Mike and myself and other, presidential details, planning for NCAA tournaments, the mass crowds. And so what changed the whole course of how I think we should look at not only emergency management, but security as well, for me, if 6-7 years ago you would have told me that I would have been planning for active shooters, the answer would have been yes. However, May 18th, 2018, our Santa Fe shooting occurred, which is approximately 10 miles from City of Texas City. I was one of the first emergency managers to arrive, and seeing that chaos and seeing, what I saw and experienced, it changed the concept and the dynamics of emergency management and security. It's very important that we tie it in together. I think historically, even on the military side, on deployments, I just worried about the operational command, operational communication, operational coordination, and that was it. As Rob had mentioned, you plan for these things. Prior to discussions on active shooter, everything that was going to occur in my world, I could see through a radar, aka National Weather Service, those type of things. I could plan. I could start doing my 120 hours out, start planning. For active shooters, for any disaster, such as we have in City of Texas City, I have 20 chemical plants that we have the third largest port in the state, 7th in the country, and we produce 13% of the nation's fuel. So my job as an emergency manager has now evolved into a Homeland Security Director with the protection of key critical infrastructure protection. But the most important protection that I've had the opportunity to really work with, as Mike mentioned, was how do we prepare for that? If you were to ask me, how do I prepare for active shooters and how do I prepare for schools? So the mindset that I've taken now is any special event, your parades, your basketball games. We just saw what happened in Washington this week at the Nationals baseball game. I treat that now as a potential incident, not a special event. As Mike mentioned, and we talked the truth now, is every time I walk in somewhere, mass crowds, I have to ask myself the what ifs. What's protected? Right. What is going to happen? What is the potential? Everything that we've ever seen, Mike and I, we testified in front of the Senate. As he mentioned, how do you identify? And I think with working with technology now is one format of identifying. I continuously work with the Houston Fusion Center, but that comes because of technology. Everything that we utilize nowadays, as an emergency manager / Homeland Security Director, I have to take everything, not just your standard plan, check the box, and you completed your task. It is about relationships. It is about asking yourselves the what ifs. We can no longer put our heads in the sand. We just cannot. And those are the things that we look at. One of the things that I have we talked about crisis communication. One of our team members, Liz Rogers, we continuously talk about that. How do I get that information? And I think now it's evolved. I got a 14-year-old at home, and I don't know if you remember this, Taylor, but there was a thing called beepers, and we used to use those.
I'm not that young.
Yeah.
I know what those are.
Okay. And so that was our form of communication. Now we look at cell phones, but we have to remember that not everybody has them. Right. We got that socioeconomic status that we got to consider, along with the groups. So talking to Liz all the time, it's like, how do I close that gap, that communication gap? Working with security firms, working with technology, working with plans, as Mike and I have talked about, and he's mentioned, we have to get that platform where it has to be established. But once again, it starts with asking the ugly question of what can happen. I mean, I think if we look throughout what's happened this year, And really throughout the last 2 or 3 years, we see everything starting to engage. And during my studies, I noticed that not one place has been untouched. What do I mean by that? Active shooters in churches, shopping malls, baseball games, marathons. So pretty much it does not discriminate. It's pretty much straight out. Walking in, as Mike mentioned, what do we have? Medical personnel. Then the big thing too, as part of our security and part of our emergency management, is the reunification piece. Mike talked about the mental health. That's part of the recovery process. When we had the Walmarts in El Paso, how do you manage those big groups? And I think as industry leaders, we have to start thinking on the what ifs and cover the crisis communication. But I think the underlying factors too should also be the compassion piece, that we have to keep in mind that we can plan all we want, but we also have to be prepared. And as Rob was mentioning, that sometimes getting out of your element can throw a curve for you, but we have to be ready for that curve at all times. So yeah, it's a question that I probably could never answer straight out, right. But I just think really asking yourself the what if, as what we did, and the first thing we started noticing is what can possibly, and not only here, but anywhere we went. We're in Vegas, what can happen, and we all know what can happen. But that's the one question to prepare, ask the what ifs, cover every corner. Remember the crisis communication. How do we communicate? How do we close that communication gap? Preparing, but the communication gap not only with community, but with our stakeholders, law enforcement, fire, emergency management, and utilizing the technology that's out there to get that information to us and to get us better prepared. Yeah.
Let's talk about technology, because I know people want to hear about what solutions or technology they can put in place to combat this challenge. We understand not one technology is going to solve this challenge. I think everyone has to have a gun policy, gun procedure, active shooter plan, SOP plan in place to combat this challenge. But most of these active shootings that we see nowadays happen in key prep stages. When I talk about prep stages, I talk about parking lots, I talk about parking garages, the Parkland shooting in Florida happened in a stairwell. How that shooting went down in Parkland was a student had an AR rifle under a live movie camera for about 60 seconds in a stairwell, just hanging out in the stairwell before we went to the hallway. So what technologies are available to combating this challenge? Rob, I want to start with you. Let's go back to Rob. You work for ZeroEyes. Let's talk about ZeroEyes, but talk about some other technologies you think would be best in place to combating this active shooter challenge.
Right. So I think the devastation that you see in those instances, it's frustrating to go back and look at cameras and see that they were on camera, nobody was watching, right? So in a lot of those school shooting situations, they were in front of a camera, and you see the image after the fact, nobody watches those live. We're trying to tap you on the shoulder when you need to know, you need to look at this footage right now and do something with it. And particularly with, in that the alerting software, the different apps that can actually do that, different lockdown procedures, those are all very helpful. There's only so much technology you can do. The truth of the matter is you need somebody who is compassionate, who can see those things first. In a school environment, I think your SROs are absolutely the most critical, and they have the right tools. So if you want to pull SROs out, I think that's a mistake. I think that you need to have somebody who understands the people, sees them come to work every single day. Unfortunately, you say you could be your whole life and see, I don't have an answer to this, and we can talk about it all the time. We need to be better to each other, right? And so there's no real solution to that. If we treated people, better, if there wasn't bullying, perhaps we could avoid those. But when there's signs, these mental health issues, it turns out that every single school shooter has turned in a homework assignment that had scribbles on the side that were ooh, we saw this coming, we didn't do anything about it. So reporting structures, when you do see something, you see something, you say something. And how do we do that? And how do we aggregate that information? And what is noise and what is fact? And whether you're going to do that with software, really the best case is that we all watch each other, we monitor for these social situations, and that is a solution. However, in this world, when you have a teacher and their job is task saturated, what do? You miss things that are right in front of you all the time. And I feel like I'm getting a page and I need to go to the data bank of payphones right now. right? I mean, your cell phone's on you. Like, people used to run out of rooms and do this, and now you look at your phone the whole time. You have no idea what's going on. And here's another task. Oh, you have a learning plan that you have to do this for this student, and you have to do this for this student. You start to miss the things that are right in front of you. So how do you aggregate information and make it easier to understand? I mean, that's where technology comes in, and unfortunately, we're creating more steps in the process and inundating people more and more. The technologies that I'm most interested in are the things that make things simpler. So our entire philosophy is, when you really critically need to look at the camera, we tap you on the shoulder, send you an alert. When you need to lock the doors, there's something on your phone that you can use right now that's going to do something for you. And ideally, when you see something that is really detrimental and you're like, someone needs help there, that you stop in your day for a moment and you write that down, and you notify other people that this is going on, we need to look for this. So, as I'm layered security, one element of layered, I'm talking about that worst case scenario, but the things that are going to happen again and again and again that are going to make our lives better, how are we better to each other, and how do we nurture these kind of environments so that when you go to the grocery store it feels safer, so that when you go to a baseball game it's okay, or Walmart, whatever the case may be. What are those tools? And those are the most interesting, where you take really complicated information, you make a very small determination. And a lot of this is, you can deal with software and technology to leverage that. I'm saying cameras should be leveraged a lot more because they're ubiquitous, they're everywhere,
Right.
And that's where we're going with it. But there's so many other things that you could do to take that task saturation away from people.
Yeah, autonomous, seamless. Mike, Tom, talk about some other technologies that you think would be best placed for this scenario.
I want to talk about that real quick. And one of the things that I get asked a question about a lot of times is, hey, what camera providers do you recommend?
Manufacturers,
Yeah,
right,
what manufacturer is the best? And I don't like to answer that question because honestly, a lot of them are very good. It doesn't matter really. I mean, technology is pretty compatible with each other now. I mean, everybody's kind of stepped up their game. So to me, it doesn't really matter too much as far as what camera quality, because they're all about the same, whether it's a Vigilon, Genetec, whatever. I always ask the follow-up question is, what preventative software do you have on those cameras that are going to allow you to get a snapshot of the situation as the event is unfolding, so that you can make those snap decisions and respond, right? And so we talk about a proactive approach, and I'm not a paid spokesman for ZeroEyes, but you talk about ZeroEyes. Rob talked about the Boulder, Colorado shooting. Where did that shooting occur? Where did it begin? It began in the parking lot, and I know that there may be some hesitancy on behalf of some corporations, whether they be a grocery store or a financial office, to install that particular type of software that would allow once a weapon is detected to shut down to lock that door. But let me ask you a serious question. In Boulder, Colorado, let me tell you what I think. I believe that in Boulder, Colorado, they had software like ZeroEyes on their camera systems, on their exterior camera systems, that weapon would have been detected in the in the parking lot, and those victims that were killed inside the store probably would not have been victims. They would have lived today. And so, like I said, I'm not a paid spokesperson of ZeroEyes, but I am a firm believer in that proactive approach and using technology to our advantage. We're moving into the year 2022. I almost got lost. I'm getting older, man. But we're moving into 2022. And so we need to be using this technology as a supplement to our plan, right? And I've seen people make mistakes where they rely heavily solely on technology to answer all of their, to resolve all of their problems. And so what we did at Texas City ISD was, the first thing that I did is I gave myself 30 days to give an assessment on where we were as far as our human behavioral aspect, our mental health, our technology systems, and it was a wreck. And what we try to do is come in and streamline everything. and put in plans and protocols and policies from day one that were behavioral, that had to have with human, had to deal with human interaction. Because, like I said, that is what is going to help us identify. That's more than half of the battle, is identifying these behaviors in these individuals who want to cause us harm. The software is a supplement to the protocols that you're writing. For example, we had a different software that we used. It was a facial recognition software, and I know that there's a lot of political talk about facial recognition being used in public spaces. I believe in the Constitution. I believe that you have no right to privacy in a public space. A school is a public space. We chose a very, I believe, effective facial recognition software. And I chose this particular software because I knew that it did not take into consideration race. And I was asked the question by multiple people in the community that maybe have read an outdated article that wasn't in touch with the new current technological advances about how facial recognition could discriminate against people of color. And I specifically chose that one because it didn't take that into consideration. It solely worked off biometrics. And so, it was kind of controversial when we pushed it out. And I remember talking to my director, who I had just hired a week or two before, and the first time we rolled out that software was for our graduation. We had about 10,000. We're not as big as Katy, but we had about 10,000 people at that graduation, and we worked with our integrator at deploying some cameras on our entry points. And we were filtering everybody that was coming in that was capturing their photos. And so what we did different, and we talk about policies and procedures and pre-planning, is so that we could answer those questions with a straight face of those people who asked about, is your entire student database in this program? The answer was no. The only people that were in that program were selected individuals who either had a criminal trespass warning with a parent who came up to the school and became belligerent, or a student who we felt was a threat based upon actions, not just behaviors, because that would be unethical in my opinion. And then we would put in our students that were at our alternative school, which once they go to the alternative school, they understand that they cannot access any public school property. So they were banned from attending graduation. So I remember when we pushed that out, I told my director, I said, I just want this to work. It would be great if it worked the first day, just so I could shut everybody up. And so sure enough, we had a kid enter. And like I said, we were just rolling it out that day. We were on the east side of the stadium, watching folks come in. We were screening, and we got a immediate hit that this kid was approaching the north gate, and identified him. And then I wrote in those policies, because people will try to argue that you're discriminating, and so, or you're using the technology to solely determine if that is that person or identify them. That is where the planning piece comes in. That is where we had built in our policy is that three individual humans have to verify, yes, this is the person, before we even make contact. And so it was beautiful. Kid's about 20 yards from the gate, camera picks him up, sends a notification. By the time me and my director walk across the field, our deputies are already onto him. We have two of my security techs up in the press box that were running the system. We watch the kid walk in, he sits down, we tap him on the shoulder, ask him his name. He identifies himself, we walk him out. And that is an example of technology that is used in a proactive and an ethical manner that I believe that we should be accompanying with policies that are written so that we can get out ahead of these things. We had a student that had a felony arrest warrant, sexual assault and a felony forgery. Very dangerous kid. Of my 3 years as an administrator, there was only about 3 kids that I really worried about. This was one of them. And I knew that he was very volatile. We had weapons that, had access to weapons. We had saved him. We had him going live on Facebook playing Russian roulette. We had officers at at his door within 10 minutes because of the confidential reporting system that we had in place. This kid shows up, or he misses school about 3 days because he knows that he's got a warrant. He knows our SROs are going to take him. So he comes in, or he pulls in the parking lot, gets out of the parking lot, boom, our facial recognition system identifies him about 50 yards from the entrance. Deputies meet him at the front door. He never steps foot inside the door. That is proactive thinking and planning. And so it doesn't matter if you're a school, a university, same thing, I guess, or a corporation. These are the proactive types of plans that you need to have in place while using companies like ZeroEyes or this facial recognition software or others, access control, in conjunction with that advanced planning like we would have done at the Secret Service or the White House. Your medical response, right? What are we doing for medical response? Yes, in 2014, President Obama passed a mandate, where the Stop the Bleed campaign, right? That's not enough. So Abe and I have been working on some things, and we're working on a new curriculum for that. What we were trying to do is empower the civilian. If somebody comes in here right now and starts shooting everybody, who's going to be the first to be able to respond? Well, I'm going to turn to Abe, obviously, but it's not going to be police. It's not going to be law enforcement. It's going to be us. It's going to be us at our soccer games with our kids. It's going to be us at the concert at Mandalay Bay, right? I was here that night. I worked that night. We have to empower individuals. And so I'll leave it at that.
No, it's good points there. We're getting close on time here, but a couple last questions. We talk about technologies, but the biggest question when it comes to any kind of proactive technology is, Taylor, how much is it going to cost? I have no budget, I have no funding, how am I going to allocate resources to afford this kind of technology? So Mike brings up a good question. Mike, I took this from you. Planning's free. You told me that on one episode, and I took that to heart, because planning is free. You have to have a proactive procedure in place. But Tom, talk about some of the procedures from your perspective when it comes to funding technology or funding these proactive measures to combat the challenge.
One of the things, that's a great question. As far as funding, obviously there's always, people, it's a very expensive process. So from our standpoint and my standpoint, very fortunate that, I can pretty much time a lot of the security that is going to be utilized for critical protection, such as, not only the schools, but our infrastructure. So those are the Homeland grants that I continuously work on, the Urban Area Security Initiative grants that we have for the protection of our critical infrastructure, to work with the schools to utilize that. Everything I do now involves technology, everything from utilizing, it used to be a big thing when I got Tech City 5 years ago, drones. Drones were something now that we utilize. It's a common, feature now in everything we do. But as far as the cost, those are the things that I look at when I have to start looking at, we did get a couple of cameras through our through our Homeland grants that allowed me to have two 30-foot deployable cameras with license plate readers and those type of things. And and we use them, Mike and I, we've used them together, and it helps, and of course there's always that, you get into our space type thing, but it did help us, track down an individual that had once again a warrant, and then we ran the plate, and sure enough, we were able to take care of that situation and prevent anything else from happening. But going back to the original question, it is the cost to offset is the grant system that we utilize. And some of our partners and some other individuals also work with the companies to get the verbiage that's going to be needed for that, And so technology now is at the forefront of everything we do, as far as protection, everything from the drone system to the camera systems that we've been talking about. Everything. Cybersecurity is a huge issue now for us that we're having to identify. So utilizing those groups together with technology combined, and as far as the offset, that is the one area that if I look throughout the municipalities, that is the one investment that's always been made is in the grant system. And I hope that answers the question. But
it does, because who are they going to point the finger to when an active shooter event happens? Who are they going to point the finger? They're going to point to the security safety director. KDISD, I'm from Dallas. I know how big that school district is, 75 whatever schools. Who are they going to point the finger to if y'all don't have an active shooter plan? They're going to point the finger at you. So why does it take blood on the ground for these kind of events to be funded? Why don't we have a policy in place? Why don't we have legislation in place? Because if we're talking about schools, we're talking about universities, what do you see in schools and every corporate building here in America? You have a fire code, right? That was because, you know why they put fire code in? It's because schools used to burn down. Schools don't burn down anymore, right? Now we need a gun code. We need a gun policy, gun legislation. So we need forms and legislation put in place to put this problem to an end. That way everyone has a certain peak or certain minimum criteria that they have to meet to offset this challenge that we see. And Mike, I know you wanted to say something too about this. So.
Well, you want the truth, and the truth is, I've already stated it. Why don't we have, or why does it take blood on the ground for there to be change?
Right.
It's because we have the wrong people making decisions. You have a security director. Let him do, or her do her job. Let them make the decisions based upon their experience. You know, that's, people ask me all the time at Texas City ISD why we had so much national coverage and how we were able to do in 18 months what a lot of school districts didn't. Some of the things that we did were controversial in the education industry, but from the security perspective, I didn't think it was controversial at all. I thought it was very proactive. I thought the job was to protect staff and students and community. The answer is that we had a superintendent who understood they were not qualified to make the decisions that I made. And that's why I was able to move at light speeds compared to other districts.
You mean he stayed in his lane? Is what you're saying?
Stay in your lane.
Stay in your lane.
You know, Liz and I are working on a PR strategy right now. We've discussed this from an imagery standpoint because people look at, you know, they see things and that speaks to them, right? Sometimes you take away what you see rather than what someone says. And one of the things that I want to do, and it's going to aggravate a lot of people, I may never get a job in schools again, I don't know. But the problem is we have to start talking realistic. We have to be honest, and sometimes that hurts, like I said, is we want to put together, a circle of chairs, and in particular, talking about education. You've got a specialist in mental health, you've got a specialist in curriculum, you've got a specialist in student services, student data, and all this other stuff, right? And then in that one chair, you have a superintendent that's for safety and security. Which one of those doesn't fit? We're all smart enough to know that. But the problem is until there is legislation passed that says that, there has to be, even if it's a superintendent, they have to have X amount of experience and training.
Right.
Nothing will change because we were an anomaly. I'm sure that Katie and other districts you probably have a ton of red tape, right? Who dictates what happens in Katy? Primarily, probably your superintendent. If they don't want something and you know that it's effective, are you going to get it? No. And that's just the cold, hard facts, and that's the truth. And that's what's got to change. You know, there's no reason why school districts should not have ZeroEyes at their mass gathering events. Katie, I mean, y'all's football team, how big are some of you? This is high school football, folks. Now it's Texas, but how many attendees do you have at some of your games?
We could have 30,000.
30,000 at a high school football game.
One of the largest stadiums.
Right. Why would you not have some type of proactive technology on your system or at your stadium?
Because superintendents do not think like us in this room.
That's right. They don't.
Which is why you're on the board now.
That's right. I am a board member now. So.
Everybody needs board members.
I mean, even at Texas City ISD, I could not get ZeroEyes in there. And I argued and I argued and I argued because we had to transition in superintendents. Wasn't going to happen. And so, it is what it is, but that's the hurdle, especially in K-12. Now, corporations, you got nobody to blame but yourself if you're not taking proaction. That's just the truth. So.
All right, so last 5 minutes here, we're going to take a key takeaway from each of you. I want to get one final piece of advice towards this active assailant problem. I hope you guys in the room have seen value from these three individuals and what they bring to the table. So Rob, let's start with you. Final piece of advice when it comes to preparing for the unknown for active assailants.
So I think you need to be as proactive as you possibly can be. That needs to be, you need security experts to look at that. You need to look at what has happened in the past. I read like the Secret Service report all the time, has probably the best information that I do in the K-12 space, but in kind of most spaces, you need your security expert to look at what the possible events are and then kind of work backwards from there. So what would we do to make us a little bit better prepared for that? And then you need to make tough choices with the budget. I think that the first thing that you need to do is with your camera system, how effective is it? Does that need to be upgraded? And then what do you actually do with that? So you need the right security people looking at the right information, work your way backwards, and then leverage technology.
Proactive. Tom, let's do Tom and then Mike. We'll finish with you because I know Mike likes to talk a lot. So.
Really? No, one big, I mentioned it before, always treat, and it's unfortunate, Taylor, that we have to think this way, or at least I have to, is number one, not if, but when it happens, are we trained? And number two, ask yourself continuously, can this special event become a potential event or potential incident? And we have to. And number three, we talked about budgets. Just how important is a human life? And how important is the quality of safety? And I think those are the hard questions that we have to ask ourselves. And that's my piece of advice.
Last but not least,
I don't have anything to say.
nothing from Matranga. Mike Matranga, nothing from you.
No, I have nothing to say. Write that down.
Oh, yeah, this is a once in a lifetime opportunity. All right. Bring us home, Mike.
No, I just thank you guys for having us. It's an honor being here. Thank you, Taylor. Rob, it's an honor sitting here amongst you, Tom. I think, guys, the sooner we realize we live in a society that's changed significantly, technology is important, don't get me wrong, but it can also be counterproductive. It's changed behaviors in people. Rob cited the Secret Service's data. I would tell you, and like I said, this is free information. It's been there since 1999. It was created after Columbine, the National Threat Assessment Center. There's two studies that I refer to quite a bit when I do these speaking engagements. Is 2008 bystander study. It basically says that over 90% of these events, someone knew that this person was going to act, and they did not respond. Why? So we have to find a way to encourage those people to step up and respond. The other one would be, while I was working at the White House, and Abe was at the White House, is the James Hodgkinson shooting, which was the congressional softball game shooter, where they were the politicians were practicing for the congressional softball game, and Rep. Scalise was shot, and some others. That is the perfect example of identifiers in identifying behavior of an unknown or active assailant that went ignored for decades. You look back at his behavior as a child and even into his adulthood. He had problems with his parents, his employer, his marriage was falling apart. He had financial issues. Then he got involved in politics heavily, and not in a good way. And so I would tell you that it's all of our responsibility to be observant and be aware of who's with us, who's around us, whether it be family members, whether it be strangers. Pay attention to your gut feeling. It doesn't lie. Do your research. Look at the Secret Service's website, the National Threat Assessment Center. That information is invaluable, and everything starts with a plan. You have to have a medical plan. You have to have your crisis communications plan, designation of assets, interlocal agreements with your partners and your stakeholders. So thank you for having us. I really appreciate it. And turn it over to you.
Thanks, Mike. And for those who have any questions or comments or concerns, feel free to come up after the panel, meet and greet both Tom, Mike, and Rob. They'll be happy to speak with you guys if any questions for them. For my podcast, you guys can follow me on LinkedIn, subscribe to me on YouTube, or listen to us on Spotify. This will be uploaded tomorrow on YouTube as well as Spotify in case you guys want to pass the session along. Email me at info@SecurityVIP, and if you want to be a sponsor, you can always sponsor my podcast too. But appreciate you guys taking the time today. Y'all have fun. Have a fun conference. Stay safe.